Hare Krishna. Welcome to the Expand the Bliss podcast. Thank you for joining me here on YouTube, or maybe you're also watching this on Facebook. It's nice to be with you here this evening. For me, it's evening. I don't know what time it is. In whatever country that you're watching, you can let me know where you're watching from down in the comment section below. And you can also leave a like on the video and subscribe if you enjoy. And even if you don't enjoy, put a comment down below and let me know why you didn't enjoy. Constructive criticism is very helpful. Thank you very much. So, yes, on this episode of the Bliss Podcast, we're going to be talking about the British Raj in India, which many of you probably don't know too much about, because this topic has very interestingly and scientifically been covered up by the modern education system, especially in the British Isles, the UK. This is not widely covered because it is, to be perfectly frank, an atrocious era of history. And why am I talking about it as a practitioner of Krishna consciousness? Because this has a significant historical significance in our movements, and our spiritual master Srila A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada, who brought us the wonderful process of Krishna consciousness, the most ancient religion, 5,000 years old at least. That's when it was recorded in the Bhagavad Gita, one of the sacred texts of India. And this is the essence of all religion, which was contained within the ancient Vedic scripts hidden in the Sanskrit language. And they were brought to the Western countries by our spiritual master, who grew up and lived during the British Raj. And our spiritual master also was educated in British and Scottish colleges. So there is a significance for the disciples of Srila Prabhupada about this historical period in time. And also our spiritual master, he revealed the real nature of the British occupation in India before. I'm not sure about this, but certainly he was a revolutionary in many ways, more ways than I can count here on the in this short time. But in one of these ways, that he revealed the true nature of the occupation, which cannot be found even in modern historical textbooks in British schools, and is actually not even taught in the curriculum. So it's very interesting, and there is a bit more of a deeper philosophical and spiritual reason as to why this is done, aside from the materialistic, moralistic side of things that some commentators and critics may bring up. So it's a very interesting and deep topic, and it may also be split into two podcasts because there are two rather large aspects to consider, both the material historical side and also the larger picture in the Vedic point of view. So I'm going to try and cover both of these topics, but we don't have so much time here in the podcast, so I'm going to allot two different podcasts for them. Let's dive right in to the videos that I've picked out here. We're also going to do some reading for Srila Prabhupada's quotes, and specifically I'm excited to bring to the podcast a very nice book that is being produced by the Bhaktivedanta Lives in Sound Society, or the Bliss for short, which is the nice channel and organization which is bringing you this podcast. The Bliss is producing ebooks based on the teachings of Srila Prabhupada, And one of those ebooks is the exciting biography of Srila Prabhupada, which covers Srila Prabhupada's entire life history, from his early childhoods and also preamble to his early childhoods, beginning from Lord Chaitanya 500 years ago and up until the final days of Srila Prabhupada's Leela, or pastimes. So this is a very exciting book that also contains a portion dedicated to the British Raj in India. And we're going to be reading from that portion before the book is even released, which will be soon on the Expand the Bliss website, available for download. You can find it there all along with our other ebooks. So please stay tuned, and this is going to be very nice. I'm pleased to read this along with you here. And we're also going to be watching some videos of the Raj in India, some interesting color documentary footage, and seeing some also how the effects of this is rippling through modern society today, and how also modern Britain deals with this issue, which has now been recently unsurfaced by some scholars and historians. So let's get into it. You can start here, though, with this picture that I selected for the podcast thumbnail. This is rather a summarizing picture that nicely encapsulates the mood of the British Raj's occupation in India. You can see here a royal, not royal, but some kind of imperial officer, some kind of colonial officer in a cart being driven, although you cannot see it fully in the picture, being driven by four Indian, looks to be Punjabi men who are running the cart, which actually I'm not entirely sure. I think the wheels are in motion, but I saw some where there are no wheels, and actually the Indians are just taking the cart on their shoulders. I think this one is being pulled on wheels, but there are more austere versions also of this. And this is kind of the mood. A very small amount of Britishers occupying a huge India and ruling rather unfavorably and unjustly, and exploiting the Indian population. So this already sets the scene, and now let us take a little dive into history. This particular clip will show us a bit of the not so bright side of the historical history here. Oh, sorry.
For almost 200 years, from 1757 to 1947, Great Britain ruled impassively over India and 1/4 of the land surface of the earth. British rule seemed to many to be God-sent and immutable. What began as a purely business venture of the East India Company, in time became the British Raj of India. Queen Victoria called India the jewel in the crown of the empire. Indeed, India was known the world over as a great civilization whose name was synonymous with sophistication and class. The British Raj wanted to make the people of India into a race of brown-skinned Englishmen that would be Indian in blood, but English in taste, in morals, in intellect, and in religion. This was Victorian and Edwardian India. 1896 brought the Great Famine, followed by the bubonic plague of 1897, wherein 2.5 million people died in India. These disasters marked the beginning of the decline of the British Raj. Strict and often intrusive measures were taken to subdue the plague. People were harassed, houses were broken into, hosed down, fumigated and limewashed with no concern for the sensibilities of the inhabitants. The police carried out orders with a toughness that on occasion became brutal. Complaints poured in about women being offended and money being stolen. Deaths due to famine and plague escalated at such an alarming rate in 1887 that in Bombay and Calcutta, cremations were hurriedly performed openly in the streets. Thus, the people of India became increasingly dissatisfied with their foreign rulers. Soon after, the movement for independence was born, and political activists like Bala Gangadhar Tilak, Mahatma Gandhi, Pandit Nehru, Jinnah, Bhagat Singh, Subhash Chandra Bose, Aurobindo and others took the stage. From time to time, there were demonstrations protesting British rule and occasional outbreaks of violence. These were promptly suppressed by British force that was sometimes fatal, such as the massacre at Jallianwala Bagh, where 379 men, women and children were killed, and 1,560 fell wounded. Other events in the world added to the uncertainty of the empire's future when World War I broke out in Europe between 1914 and 1918, resulting in the deaths of more than 10 million people, many of which were Indian soldiers fighting for the British. Indeed, these were troubled times. The karmic reaction of decades, even centuries, of materialism was now taking its relentless toll. In an atmosphere of expanding empires, wars, natural disasters, political calamity, and all-round spiritual void, the world was clearly lacking the leadership and example of someone who knew the real purpose of the human form of life.
So, this is a very interesting clip, actually, for multiple reasons. This movie is actually elaborating on the Leela of the Grand Spiritual Master of our Spiritual Master, Srila Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Thakura. And the footage shown here is from an earlier period of the Raj than some of the other footage that I'll show you. So it's delineated, gives some information about the beginning of the independence movement and so on and so forth. What's interesting here is that based on my research, actually some of these facts are actually a little bit blown out of proportion or not actually correct. I don't want to criticize the people who made the film. I think this is what is propagated by the modern education system, but at least some scholars have brought some points here that just for the information of the viewer, it's stated here, for example, that the British East India Company were the first people to, so to speak, invade India or occupy a part of India as a purely as a business venture. But apparently, I have heard that actually the those who organized the British East India Company and who were put in charge of it were actually from the British government, and actually were the same people who had just been removed from some politics in America, and were actually forced, not forced, but were ordered to colonize India. So actually this was an extension of the British governmental rule. It was not simply an independent private deal. And secondly, actually this massacre, the Amritsar massacre that was mentioned here, was far more than 379 people. This is a statistic that was recorded by the British colonials, but the Indians who documented this massacre report it was almost 2,000 people. So this is kind of why I point this out, because it is very interesting that this is actually, even those who are trying to document and not exactly paint in a good light this particular aspect or this time period in history, they have also been afflicted by the propaganda which is created by even the modern British education system and the historical records, which, of course, as we know, history is written by the victors. So I think this is just interesting to point out. Now, yes, so the Raj in India lasted 200 years, from the early 19th century up until the middle of the 20th century. I guess even before the 19th century. But it's started to decline in the late 1940s. So this is a rather interesting documentary about the last 40 years of the British Empire in India, which documents also some more of the atrocities and goes a bit deeper into the history of why actually the occupation played out the way it did. And I can't cover everything in this movie. I recommend that you watch it in your own time, I guess. But let's just pick a few clips, and in this way we're going to get us a bit of a historical background to this whole deal, and I think this documentary can tell you better than I can and give you also some visual aid to help understand just what this time period was like.
But beneath this extravagant display of imperial loyalty, there lies a fragile Raj. British rule in India has been challenged by a decade of nationalist protest and terrorist violence. Viceroy Lord Hardinge remains resolute.
I need hardly say that the government of India has never for a moment thought that the evolution of this country could be colonial self-government. The idea is ridiculous and absurd.
1 year later, a Bengali revolutionary tries to assassinate Lord Hardinge. He survives, but it is another warning that British power in India is fading.
The British government in India has not only deprived the Indian people of their freedom, but has based itself on the exploitation of the masses and has ruined India. We believe that India must sever the British connection and attain complete independence.
Jawaharlal Nehru, President of the Indian National Congress, January 1930. Indian nationalism has grown in strength and ambition. In a series of reforms, Britain makes concessions towards Indian self-government. But imperial zealots are horrified at the prospect of relinquishing the Raj. Viscount Rothermere.
British rule in India is irreplaceable. It has been bought by British lives and built up by British capital. If we had not gone to India, she would still be in a state of semi-barbaric anarchy. Our duty there is not to argue with base agitators, but to govern.
The moon belongs to everyone. The best things in life are free.
Less than 100,000 British rule 315 million Indians. Marjorie Usher is governess to the children of an army colonel in Chakrata.
Entertaining in this country is very simple. You just tell the servants how many are coming and they see to everything. We have 9 servants, including the ayah, the head servant, who acts as valet to Colonel Sterling, the khitmatgar, who waits at table and looks after the silver, and the dhobi, or washerman, who does our clothes very well indeed.
For some British women, India offers the promise of adventure. Army wife, Florence Riddle.
The way in which most women in India pass their days is too boring for me. I have never been nervous of natives, for there is something...
Yeah, so as you can see at this particular point in history, I think this is in the 1930s, I'm not exactly sure, the Rajarala integrated into the Indian society, and also parts of the Indian society have also joined the Raj. Like the servants are more elevated, have more elevated positions. They dress nicely. They are taken care of in some ways, and also, as is elaborated on this part of the documentary, the royalty of India itself. This is a clip from Punjab, a Punjab wedding. This prince is being taken on a silver palanquin. They're also in cohorts with the British government. So at this particular point in history, it was a mix of tension between those who were being exploited and also those who were exploiting themselves. But anyway, the overall pressure was tremendous because, as was previously mentioned, there had been famines. The British had been taking the natural resources of India for the past 150 or so years, and also there had been various massacres and racist segregation and exploitation of all kinds. So, generally speaking, the Indians wanted the Raj out. So that is the backdrop for this particular time period. So let's read now what Srila Prabhupada, our spiritual master, has to say about the backgrounds of this whole thing. And yes, what I wanted to do is actually play this movie. Play this movie while I read from the biography, but I don't actually know if it's going to be possible. Hold on, give me 1 moment, or I try to live on the podcast try to make this work. Prabhu, is there any way? Yeah, well, I didn't really think this one out too far ahead. I would like to read the biography while I watch this movie in the background. So, hold on. Now you're seeing some real spontaneous podcast background workings here. So what we're going to do is something very quickly. Please excuse me for this. Unfortunately, I previously thought that the podcast had a pause option on the recording software, and that would have been really smooth. But unfortunately, that is not the case. So anyway, what can be done? Just going to send this here. Look at that, very nice. All right. So now, by the use of modern technology, which we don't reject in spiritual life because it can become very useful, we're now going to read from the phone. Jai. All right, so let's put this in the background and read from Srila Prabhupada. Hold on, let's put this on mute. Okay, so Srila Prabhupada says, it has been predicted in the 12th canto of the Srimad Bhagavatam that the Englishmen would conquer India. It is mentioned there in connection with the history of Chandragupta that Yavanas will become kings. This refers to the English and Mohammedan occupation of India. India has been invaded for 1,000 years. Such invasions started in 1000 AD and lasted up to 1947, which marked the end of the British period. India was under subjugation by many foreigners, Mughals, Pathans, Greeks, and many others. The last two were the Mohammedans, who ruled for 800 years. and then the British, who occupied India for 200 years. This nationalism and invasion began in Europe with the Romans. The Romans wanted to spread their empire all over the world, but later they were vanquished. There have been many empires, such as the Carthaginian Empire, Egyptian Empire, Greek Empire, Mughal Empire, and British Empire. All these empires are now simply history because they were built on the premise of combining and exploiting others. All these empires were nothing but gangs of rogues, and there is a story in this connection that illustrates the point. One time, Alexander the Great, the famous Greek emperor, arrested a thief and was going to punish him. The thief pleaded, "Sir, you are going to punish me. But what is the difference between you and me? I am a small thief, and you are a great thief. That's all. You are occupying others' kingdoms by force, although you have no right to do that. Because you have the power, and because you have some way or other found the opportunity, you are conquering country after country and plundering its citizens. You are doing the same thing as I do." Alexander, being a sensible man, then considered, "This is actually true. I am nothing but a big thief." He released the thief. "Yes, I am no better than you." On the other hand, the Vedic etiquette enjoins, when enemies come, they should be received in such a way that they will forget that there is any animosity between the two parties. For example, in the Srimad Bhagavatam, there is a description how Bhima fought with Jarasandha. They were fighting the whole day, and it was a fight of two Kshatriyas, so unless one died, the fight would continue. Bhima and Jarasandha were equally powerful, and the fight was going on without any decision, but at the same time, because Bhima was a guest at Jarasandha's house, at night they were eating and talking together in a friendly way. During that time, they practically forgot all about the fight. This was India's culture. Similarly, when Arjuna went to see his opponent Duryodhana in the battlefield of Kurukshetra, Duryodhana immediately greeted him. "Come here, my brother. What is your desire? How can I help you? Do you want to take my kingdom without a fight? I can give it to you immediately." Duryodhana thought that Arjuna came to beg the kingdom from him, but Arjuna answered in a Kshatriya way, "No, that is not why I came. That we shall decide in the battlefield." In other words, while Arjuna was at his place, Duryodhana was ready to offer him the whole kingdom without any fight. This was India's culture. Throughout the history, many have entered India initially as friends, but later on turned out to be conquerors because India was so open in all spheres. Indian people treated everyone as a guest and invited them. "Please come and learn." Lord Jesus Christ also came to India for this purpose. During his time, Chaitanya Mahaprabhu instructed those who have taken their birth in India to do para-upakara, good to others. India was already conquered by the Mohammedans and the Pathans, but the Lord never asked the Indians to restrict anyone else from entering. He did not care whether Mohammedans or Christians came to occupy, because he knew that Indian culture is so strong that rascals would not be able to do any harm to it. They would come and plunder for a few years and then go away, but Indian culture is so great that it would be distributed everywhere. Besides that, Indian masses were never trained to become nationalists. They thought, "Let anyone become the king. It doesn't matter. Let us live peacefully, and whatever is due in tax we shall pay. That's all." When the Mohammedans came, the people did not think of them as foreigners. It did not matter to them. Although sometimes out of fanaticism there was a fight, the Mohammedans did not touch the Indian culture. It was Aurangzeb who began to persecute. Otherwise, during the rule of the first emperors, such as Akbar, Jahangir, or Shah Jahan, there was no trouble, and they did not touch the culture itself. There was even some marriage connection between Hindus and Mohammedans at that time. The Mohammedans simply wanted to remain as Kshatriya kings and did not interfere otherwise. Instead of a Hindu kshatriya, the Muslim kshatriya took charge, and people were satisfied. They thought, we have to work, so somebody must be a king. There is a Muslim kshatriya in power. All right, let him remain there as king and not interfere. Later on, Indian people accepted the Britishers in the same way. And similarly, the British gave liberty to India's culture and religion and never interfered. That was their credit. They were very good politicians and knew that if they were interfered with the internal affairs, they would be lost. That was the influence of Queen Elizabeth, who guided them. She was very popular. In the British period, there was no scarcity and no leniency. With 300 rupees, people were so happy, although nowadays those 300 rupees would equal to 10,000. During the reign of Queen Elizabeth up to the period of Queen Victoria, the English nation advanced in so many ways. They wanted to leave a permanent record in history that they were the greatest nation in the world. In 1950, a government statistics officer in India went to a village and submitted a report that said that the villagers inquired, if we again give votes to the Englishmen, will they come and take charge of our country again? In other words, they were feeling the absence of the British. Actually, in India during the British rule, all Indians felt very secure and did not expect that the Britishers would go at some point go away. They were so sympathetic towards them. This was the pulse felt by the statistics officer. The Indians were not very satisfied with the system of government that came into place later after the British left. British administration was very much appreciated. Even Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur appreciated the British. He wrote, Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur, by the way, sorry, a little interjection, is another acharya, another spiritual teacher, the grand spiritual master of our spiritual master. He wrote, the Britishers are also very nice because they don't interfere with the religious affairs. According to the Queen's declaration, the Britishers pledged that they would not interfere with the religion in India and that although they were spreading Christianity, they were outwardly neutral about all religious affairs. As soon as they changed their views and tried to divide the Hindus and Muslims, the British Empire was lost. That is from Srila Prabhupada's biography, soon to come out on the Expand the Bliss website. Yes, this is a very unique perspective that Srila Prabhupada is offering here. Because although there were many atrocities committed during the Braj's occupation of India, actually the Indians felt more secure at this time because the British did bring some economic stability, and they were able to rule and protect the country. And it's been observed by some historians also that, for example, other governments like the Russians and the Bulgarians wanted to invade India, but the British took over and protected. So this has also been observed by some historians. I'm just going to skip the clip here to something more focused on the Raja's occupation, like here, or we can go a little further back in the documentary also. So, yes. So this is one perspective. This is a perspective of our spiritual master. But there are other aspects to this. For example, our Srila Prabhupada also points out some of the atrocities that were committed in the name of by the British Raj that have been covered up by the modern education system, and actually people are not informed about this at all. Most people are completely ignorant of these genocides. So I have been researching. There's one historian who's actually in the British government right now as we speak. His name is Shashi. I don't want to mispronounce his name. Shashi Tharoor, which the British generally butcher that pronunciation as Tharoor, but this is not actually the Devanagari pronunciation. It's actually Thakur or Tharoor. So anyway, that's not so important. He has pointed out, this historian, and challenged the UK government and the people of England that this is there have been crimes against humanity committed in India, although the Raj as a whole was people were happy in the Raj. There were some great atrocities committed, and our spiritual master also confirms that these were committed. Yeah, I would strap in because this is a rather gruesome incident in history. There was a huge famine, especially in the Bengal region in northeastern India. So this is a letter from our spiritual master here, where he details some of the aspects of the Raja's rule. Oh, sorry. Well, we're talking about the famine now, so let's just comment on this particular portion here. This is from a book, Dialectic Spiritualism, another book from Srila Prabhupada. So Prabhupada says here, yes. Oh wait, let's get a bit more context. So they're discussing a philosopher here, Machiavelli. Let's just read for context sake what Hayagriva says. Hayagriva is a disciple of Srila Prabhupada. Machiavelli certainly believed that the people should be protected, but he also believed in the use of power and might. If there are internal difficulties, they must be put down by force. If this proves impossible, the prince should divert people's attention by starting a war abroad. He even felt that it was better to go to war than to remain neutral, because a neutral nation is hated by the loser and not respected by the winner. Consequently, he praised power and war. Prabhupada, he praises war because he cannot manage internally. That is most inhumane. Hayagriva. Trouble at home, war abroad is one of his most famous points. Prabhupada, yes, and sometimes the governments create artificial restlessness and poverty. We have seen in 1940, when the Second World War was going on, that the government created an artificial famine in order to get men to fight. People who didn't work had no alternative but to join the military. The government increased the price of food, and I remember the price of rice jumping from 6 rupees to 10 rupees. The very next day, the price rose to 20 rupees. Then it jumped again to 50 rupees, whereas formerly it was only 6. This is all the result of politics. When the government is not pious or strong, this will go on, and the people will be unhappy. So there's also a huge point here, philosophically speaking, that Srila Prabhupada brings up. This is a general principle that can be applied to all governments all across the world. That as long as the government is acting sinfully, just like now in the UK also, there's been recently a very scathing scandal that's just gone on. Our health minister was recently caught in a sex scandal, an affair with his secretary, and the people are appalled that this is a man who is meant to be leading the people, setting the example, and actually he's involved in it. He already resigned, but he was obviously has a big place in the government, and he had for a long time. So as an influential figure, he does what his actions, have an impact on people's consciousness, and he was having illicit sex relations. So this kind of government, these kind of people in governments who are completely impious and irreligious, and have no Krishna consciousness, most importantly, people under this kind of government cannot be happy. So this is a general principle that can be applied, that the governments should not only just be pious, but also God conscious. Otherwise, simply they exploit other people, they use their power to better their economic situation and their influence and their position in society, and they actually have no interest for the people in general, because unless one purifies his consciousness and realizes that actually I'm not the enjoyer in this material world, the purpose of life is not to simply enjoy in an animalistic way, but actually it's to elevate the consciousness and to love God or love Krishna. Krishna is the name of God, which has been revealed by our Srila Prabhupada. It's already been there in the Vedic culture for so long, but brought to the Western countries by our Srila Prabhupada. Unless people have this God consciousness, this Krishna consciousness, then we can fix so many things. We can look into history and try to compensate for atrocities that happened in the past. But ultimately, these things will go on until we solve the base problem, which is a lack of Krishna consciousness. So that's kind of a very important point also to bring up in this connection with this discussion on the Raj, because of course many people now, it's becoming in recent years, it has become a point of contention, this criticism of British history specifically, but also all colonial history, that there should be recompensation, and that we should, analyze this pattern and make sure that it doesn't happen again. But ultimately, it must go on because it is a problem of people's impure hearts and impure minds, rather than just some bad apples on the tree. The bad apples will continue to be there until you purify the consciousness through the process of Krishna consciousness. So we've, of course, covered that process of Krishna consciousness in many other podcasts in more detail, both philosophical and practical. So you can go and check out the rest of the podcasts that we have on the channel to learn more about that. But we're not going to focus so much on that in this one. Let's continue with this particular topic. So I think actually Srila Prabhupada gives another elaboration here in this purport. So let's just read here. As already explained, problems are created by sinful activities. Although there is enough food, everyone stocks more than is needed in order to make a profit or simply in order to hoard. In 1942, in India, there was an artificial famine created by people gathering money and stocking it unnecessarily. Wealthy men collected rice which was selling at 6 rupees a pound, and suddenly, within a week, the price rose to 50 rupees a pound. 6 rupees a pound, sorry. Consequently, no rice was available on the market and people went hungry. An American gentleman present at the time remarked, "If people in our country were starving in this way, there would have been a revolution." The people in India, however, are so trained and cultured that in spite of this artificial famine, they did not revolt, but preferred to die peacefully. Of course, this is only one instance, but it shows how problems are not created by God, but by man. In Germany, during the First World War, the women went to church and prayed to God to send their husbands, sons, and brothers back safely, but none of them came back. All the women became atheists. They did not consider that God did not advocate the war and its problems. They went to him for a solution. When we create our own problems, we have to suffer the results. This is also very interesting because I saw, even within these documentaries, that actually some of the Indian women are remembering. There are diaries. This one I'm showing the video from, this is read. There are a series of diaries that are read from the people who are living at this time. And many of the Indian women, or at least one or two, are lamenting that how could God let this happen to the people of India. So this is actually not a question of God. And of course, this challenge to the existence of God comes up whenever there's a mention of genocide or famine or atrocity or authoritarian leadership or something like this. There's always this challenge that how could a just God let this happen? But of course, we have to consider that we are living in this material world, and we are here in kind of like a playground in which we've been granted the opportunity to fulfill our desires separate from God. And there is a perfect system in place of karma So everything that happens is ultimately happening because of people's previous deeds, both good and bad. That is to be considered. Of course, it's not that we don't, act in certain ways to prevent tragedies or so on and so forth, make reparations, but we should do it in a God-conscious, Krishna-conscious way. Otherwise, we're just incurring more karma. The reason I mention this is because, of course, many people are now trying to actually get economic compensation and taking all kinds of measures to make up for these various injustices that were committed. But ultimately, this is all still material. It will not actually solve the problem. So we can elaborate more on that later in a later podcast. But we're running a little bit out of time now. Like I said, there's quite a lot of stuff to cover. So what we'll do is go to this interesting video, which I think also mentions quite a lot of the points that I already mentioned in a more elaborate detail. Some of the atrocities that were committed by the Raj. And also, interestingly enough, a new dynamic kind of came up for me when I was researching this whole thing, that people in England especially are not really aware of what actually happened and are largely ignorant of the history of their own country, and such a large aspect of their national history, also the colonial empire. It's rather interesting, and many people are in support of colonialism, but and some people, of course, are not in support of it. So anyway, let's take a look and see what people are about, including the presenters who are usually largely opposed to this, Shashi Tharoor, who is giving his analysis.
Speech at the Oxford Union went viral online after he argued that British rule had destroyed India's future. Let's see a bit of that speech.
The fact is that India was already Britain's biggest cash cow, the world's biggest purchaser of British goods and exports, and the source of highly paid employment for British civil servants. We literally paid for our own oppression.
We paid for our own oppression. Dr. Tharoor will be joining us very shortly for more on that. Is he right, though? Tommy has been to Liverpool, a port city which thrived on Britain's colonial growth, to find out what people there think.
What do you know about the British Empire?
That Britain rule other countries? Well, not rule. They help rule other countries?
They're sort of involved in a lot of the countries around the world.
The British Empire, it's a very imperialistic and in the past very arrogant situation.
We used to have Australia and India and all those other countries around there, but I don't really know that much about it.
I believe that we brought a lot of freedom to people, a lot of opportunities to countries which probably didn't have them in the past.
The Redcoats marched all over the world and plundered the place. They turned up in places like Africa and said, "We're here," and that was it.
They ruled India at the time, in the 19th century and 18th century. When they did go there, they brought all the diamonds and everything down here, which Queen got at the moment.
Are you proud of the British Empire and the fact that we ruled a big part of the world?
Yeah, because it proves power. It proves that we are a powerful little country.
Are you proud of the British Empire?
Very much so, yes, yeah.
I'm proud of being part of the UK, but English history I'm not that proud of, no. I think half the problems we've got today are to do with the history of the English, not the British, the English.
Who's benefited?
Us. We've gone and we've robbed natural resources such as gold, oil, diamonds, trees. We've killed wildlife, we've killed indigenous people.
You can't live in the past, we know that. But I certainly think it had more benefits than anything else.
We've introduced parliaments and democracy voting, elections for people, one man, one vote type of thing.
Do you think we're now compensating for what the Brits did by letting immigrants into the country now?
Absolutely not, no. No, 2 million Indians fought for us in World War II, and people go on about the immigrants that come from India. If it wasn't for these people that came from these countries, we'd have lost.
I think it's time now that we've got such an influence on the countries. It's sort of like, okay, well, we'll give back some of the stuff that we took from you, yeah.
So they should compensate India, they should give it back now.
Yeah, exactly, you know. It's been ages now. They should pay it with interest, as a matter of fact.
I don't think you can compensate. How do you compensate something like that? I think we should learn our lessons.
I would probably say to them, the past is the past and we're not responsible for the past. That we should all just now get on together.
We should all get on together. The past is the past and we're not responsible for it. What are your thoughts at home? Do email us, text us, call or use social media to get in touch. Should Britain pay compensation to its former colonies? With interest, as that gentleman said. We're going to find out what our guests think in just a moment. First, though, let's hear from the man who suggested that, Dr. Shashi Tharoor, who joins us from Edinburgh this morning. Good morning to you, sir. Thank you very much for joining us.
Good morning. Good to be with you.
Your country, India, is tipped as a future superpower. Do you need Britain's money or apologies?
Well, superpower is something else. I'm afraid we're still super poor. So it's a while before we can contemplate superpower status, and I'm not sure we should. But that's another debate. I think as far as the reparations issue is concerned, what I suggested at Oxford was that what was important was the principle that a debt was owed, not a sum of money, because as somebody said in that extract earlier, you can't quantify human suffering. What you can do, of course, is to make a gesture, and I suggested £1 a year for each of the next 200 years to make up for the last 200.
And what would that amount to in your sums?
I mean, the point is, there have been calculations made by people, and they're impossible to fulfill. I mean, somebody has suggested a figure of £3.4 trillion sterling, which is, you know, far larger than your economy and far larger than you would be able to pay over the next 200 years. So I think that sort of debate is pointless. And the kinds of things I was talking about, the depredations, the dramatic reduction of India's share of global GDP from 23% when the British came to 4% when the British left, the collapse of India's exports from 27% when the British came to 2% when the British left, all of these things, and then the loss of human lives, something like 15 to 29 million Indians died unnecessary deaths in man-made famines during British rule. And the fact is, you cannot put a price on all of this.
Sure.
So reparations in monetary terms is pointless, but the principle of atonement, not just apology, but of atonement is why I suggested £1 a year.
What about the other things that Britain perhaps left India? So parliamentary democracy, you may have heard one of our guests speaking about that earlier in Liverpool. Also the rule of law, the protection of rights, the English language, a very good railway system which still employs 1.6 million Indians. Are you really saying that when Britain left India with nothing?
No, but I am saying that Britain left India a lot worse off than it would have been without Britain. As far as the railways are concerned, for example, which is frequently trotted out as an example, the railways were a wonderful British scam. They were built for British convenience, to get Britons around, and particularly, above all, to move Indian raw materials to the ports to be shipped to Britain, where very often they were manufactured into goods and shipped right back to India, where we paid extortionate prices for them. What is more, in building the railways, the British offered such extravagant guaranteed rates of return to British private investors that every line of railway in India cost double what the same mile would have cost in Canada or Australia. It was, as it was pointed out at the time, private enterprise, British private enterprise, at public risk, Indian public risk. It was essentially a colonial scam. It had nothing to do with the convenience of Indians or the demands for mass transport by Indians, because the railway lines were not constructed to serve that purpose. They were constructed, as everything else was, to serve British purposes.
Thank you, Dr. Tharoor, for those points. Alison, Britain effectively took out more than it put in, and it's a colonial scam.
Well, I've read a little bit about this, and there are some people who would say the opposite. As for being a scam, I don't agree with that at all. I'm proud of our British heritage. I think Britain did extremely well with the British Empire, but I think in 1947, when we pulled out from India and they had their independence, was absolutely right. Of course we made mistakes, but we were never brutal to people who were in the empire, as other
Amritsar massacre?
As other countries were. And
the famines you just spoke about? You're saying that wasn't brutal?
Well, it wasn't all to do with the British. Of course it wasn't.
The Amritsar massacre wasn't to do with the British of 1919?
I don't know.
Have you read what happened after what the British rather arrogantly called the Indian Mutiny, when
I have.
When they asked Hindu and Muslim sepoys to bite on cartridges which contained forbidden animal fats? Their punishment for not doing that was the most appalling acts of genocide by the British: torture of Muslims, wrapping them up in pigskins, putting men in cannon guns and shooting them into the air.
And the Hindus were supposed to be eating something to do with the cow.
I know, but I mean, you can't say that there was no brutality.
But there was very little compared with other nations.
Well,
okay.
6.1 million people died in one famine alone. That's very little, is it?
The Amritsar massacre, 300 and...
Something I'd just like to point out is that you can see that even a lady who's meant to be some kind of historian actually knows pretty much zilch about her own history, and also about the culture and history of India. Yet she's speaking big words, and actually I just was thinking now about Srila Prabhupada mentions in the introduction to Sri Ishapanishad, one of the texts that we study. He mentions that it is one of the cheating propensities of a conditioned soul. The conditioned soul has 4 defects: to cheat, to have imperfect senses, to make mistakes, and to be illusioned. So, although Prabhupada comments that although one has no knowledge, still he writes books and makes lectures on that particular subject matter. So this is cheating, and actually you can see the people who are talking on this television show, although they're acting as authorities to the people in general, they know as little as the people on the street. So it's rather kind of an appalling situation, I have to say. But anyway, let's continue. Also, though it's not mentioned in this video, I think it may be mentioned. But yeah, some of these... it was mentioned that 29 million Indians were killed as a result of genocides. Yeah, I don't know if it's going to be mentioned here, so I just want to put it out there quickly that often it is a conception in history, and this is an example of history being warped, which brings in a bit of a even bigger picture question of how do we actually perceive information? How do we understand knowledge, and more specifically, from whom do we accept the knowledge? How do we choose an authority? Because most people, they grow up and they go through a schooling system, and they are presented textbooks and points of view that they generally accept, especially the young age, as the truth of the fact. And there's not much questioning going on, because at a young age it's practically indoctrination. So you'll find that pretty much not worldwide, but especially in the Western world, the conception, for example, that Hitler is kind of the main villain of world history is rather prevalent. But what you won't find is that Winston Churchill is an even potentially bigger villain, or at least on an equal level. Just historically speaking, let's not go into what our perspective on it, but just historically speaking, Winston Churchill actually was responsible for the deaths of tens of millions of Indians. But this fact you will actually not be able to find anywhere. So it's a rather interesting point that actually now Winston Churchill is held as one of the heroes of democracy and freedom, and he's quoted, and his picture is used as an image of encouragement, and he makes TV and movie cameos and all kinds of stuff. But actually, he's a genocidal maniac. And you'll find also this Shashi, he goes onto various TV networks and he makes this point, and he blasphemes the great leader, Winston Churchill. And many of the TV presenters are getting offended and trying to shut him down because they're meeting cognitive dissonance that their national heroes that they've been brainwashed to think that are heroes are actually being revealed to be murderous, genocidal, crazy men. So this is a very interesting question that goes a bit deeper into acceptance of authority. People are thinking that, for example, people who are practicing Krishna consciousness are accepting something dogmatically or on sentiment by following a guru or a spiritual master or some scripture. But actually, they are accepting even more, not even more, they are accepting full stop fanatically. They're accepting these various authorities, history teachers, TV presenters, politicians. They're accepting what they say as all in all and generally without any question, and then they're basing their whole life on this misinformation. Whereas practitioners of Krishna consciousness are accepting that there must be such a thing as a perfect authority, and using reason and logic we approach a higher authority, the Vedic scriptures, and a spiritual master, and therefore are able to understand the truth of certain matters like why or the actual reasons behind the occupation of the Raj, the actual solution to problems like this, and who are actually the real villains in history, and who are actually the real heroes. These things and many more importantly, questions about the soul, the truth about the nature of reality, is there God, what is our relationship with him. These things are all addressed in the Vedic scriptures, and we accept that authority not on a blind sentiment, which it may not seem so directly connected, but I think it actually is kind of an interesting thing to bring up here while we're watching this, because you can see that people just accept something, little something they read, and they take that as the fact, and their whole worldview is shaped by that, and their whole life is based on this. Although they may criticize that we're religious people are following something dogmatically, actually they're doing exactly the same thing, but it's for no greater purpose. As Srila Prabhupada says, Guru you must accept. And you can see it here, everyone is reading some kind of history book or some kind of perspective they're getting. Something they learned, or they have some opinion that's generated from their education or whatever. So guru you must accept, but better you accept a guru who is even theoretically above these four defects that I previously mentioned, because otherwise you're going to be getting a lot of confused information, and then nothing really gets achieved, because ultimately we're going to watch this interview, but there's not really any solution that's derived out of it also. It's just interesting to see the perspectives and get some of the information about British occupation, but there's not really any solution that's offered. The real solution is given by our Srila Prabhupada, which we'll talk about more in the next podcast. Anyway, let's just watch a bit more of this video.
79 Indians were killed in the Amritsar massacre. David Cameron in 2013 went almost as far as an apology, saying, I don't think the right thing to do is reach back into history and seek out things you can apologise for, but he certainly acknowledged that level of brutality did take place.
I'm the first to hold up my hand and say we got things wrong. Of course we did. We're human, and by human nature we will make mistakes. But by and large, I think we didn't do at all badly when we had the British Empire and looking after India and all the things you've mentioned, which are the positives.
Should we?
I have to mention here also that a nice realization that Purja Prabhu, His Grace Purja Prabhu, brought out to me earlier, that you can see that the British here are getting offended. This is an extension of the bodily concept of life, because first and foremost, we're not this body. Their body is like a vehicle. The the consciousness, the soul within the body that makes the body alive and animated and have an argument on television and read some historical books and so on and so forth. That consciousness is the actual person, the possessor of the body, not the body himself. So, but due to our karma and our attachment to this material world, we have obtained some kind of body, and some people have an Indian body and some people have a British body. But because we're attached to a particular body, and we think that the body is ourselves, and we put all of our importance on the body, we might get offended if there is some bad history to do with our bodily identification. For example, these British people are thinking, well, my body is born in Britain, so therefore if someone criticizes British history, they're actually criticizing me. So much unnecessary anxiety and fight is created just because of this false bodily concept of life. And actually this whole issue is just arguing ultimately about the bodily concept of life, the British versus the Indian, and whose body should be recompensated for and which body is more glorious. In one sense, it is a pointless argument, because there is a greater issue, a spiritual issue at stake. And this issue of the Raja's occupation is only being superficially dented upon by these historians. Our spiritual master, as we'll cover in the next podcast, goes significantly deeper, and he goes into the real atrocity of the Raja's occupation, which was that the cover-up of the Vedic knowledge. That's the real massacre, and it massacres not because, of course, these massacres, these famines, these tortures are horrible, but they are also on the bodily platform. The real massacre is going on by propaganda against Vedic knowledge, which slaughters the soul, covers the knowledge of the soul, of the goal of life. So although this is, of course, very interesting, it is on the material platform. So there'll always be differences and conflicts. But we're going to cover the spiritual side in the next podcast, and I'm running out a little bit of time here in the studio, so we'll continue this topic. There's more to cover, historically speaking, also, and so I'll see you on the next episode of the podcast. Thank you very much for watching. We're going to go deeper next time. Please like, comment. What do you think about this whole deal? I know it's rather controversial. Maybe did you hear about this before? Were you aware of this controversial aspect of history? And let me know, what do you think we're going to be discussing on the next episode. Hare Krishna. See you next time.